March 15, 1944. Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters, Owada Communications Unit, Japan. Commander Atsuzo Kurihara stared at the intercepted transmission with bloodshot eyes, his third cup of bitter tea growing cold on his desk, a desk now covered with hundreds of pages of cryptanalysis attempts, frequency charts, and failed decryption attempts that mocked his expertise. For the past 18 hours straight, he and his team of Japan's finest cryptanalysts, men who had broken American diplomatic codes, British naval communications, multiple army ciphers, had been attempting to decode what appeared to be routine American Marine Corps tactical communications from the Marshall Islands operation. The sounds coming through their high-quality receivers defied every analytical technique in their considerable arsenal, every method that had previously succeeded against Allied communications. Besh-lo, dibeh, moasi, tkin, tlagin, nesh-chi. These weren't random atmospheric noises or equipment malfunctions. The transmission patterns suggested highly structured military communication, timing that precisely preceded American attacks, message duration consistent with operational orders, frequency usage matching known Marine Corps protocols and procedures. Yet the language itself remained utterly, completely, maddeningly impenetrable, unlike anything in their extensive files containing samples of dozens of Allied communication systems, indigenous languages from across the Pacific, even obscure dialects Japanese linguists had catalogued during colonial expansion. Kurihara commanded one of the world's most sophisticated signals intelligence operations, rivaling anything the British or Americans possessed. The Owada facility, located 20 miles from Tokyo in carefully camouflaged buildings, employed 500 personnel operating 118 radio receivers and 20 direction finders covering the entire Pacific theater. His cryptanalysts had successfully broken American diplomatic traffic using the infamous Purple Machine, providing crucial intelligence that helped plan Pearl Harbor. They had penetrated British naval communications, reading convoy routes and fleet movements. They had broken multiple army codes, anticipating operations from New Guinea to the Philippines. Yet these marine transmissions, just routine tactical messages between field units and headquarters, represented complete cryptographic failure despite 3 years of intensive effort. What Kurihara didn't know, what no Japanese intelligence officer would fully understand until American interrogators explained it after surrender, was that he was listening to the only unbroken code in modern military history, a code so elegant in its simplicity yet so impenetrable in its complexity that it would frustrate Japan's best minds until the very end. The story begins not in the Pacific theater's chaos, but in the American Southwest's high desert, where for centuries the Navajo people, the dibeh, had preserved a language unlike any other on Earth, a linguistic fortress built over millennia of isolation. Diné Bizard, the Navajo language, belongs to the Athabascan language family with approximately 20,000 speakers in 1940, confined almost entirely to the 27,000 square-mile reservation spanning Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, an area larger than West Virginia where traditional life continued largely unchanged by outside influences. The linguistic characteristics that would later confound Japanese codebreakers had evolved through centuries of geographic isolation and cultural preservation. Navajo is fundamentally verb-centered, with actions described through complex prefix and suffix combinations that can theoretically number in the millions of possible variations. The language employs 4 distinct tones, high, low, rising, and falling, that completely alter word meanings in ways incomprehensible to speakers of non-tonal languages. A slight mispronunciation doesn't just change a word's meaning. It can render an entire sentence completely incomprehensible gibberish. The phonology includes sounds physically absent from Japanese, English, and most world languages. Ejective stops, where air explodes using the glottis rather than lungs. A voiceless lateral fricative that sounds like wind whistling through clenched teeth. Glottalized sonorants and nasalized vowels that require nasal cavity resonance. For Japanese speakers trained in a language with just 5 vowel sounds and relatively simple consonant structures, even accurately hearing these phonemes, much less reproducing them, was virtually impossible, like asking someone tone-deaf to distinguish between musical notes. Philip Johnston understood this linguistic fortress's military potential with unique clarity, born from lived experience. Born in 1892 to a Protestant missionary on the Navajo reservation, Johnston had grown up speaking Navajo as fluently as English, one of fewer than 30 non-Navajos worldwide who could make that extraordinary claim. By age 9, he was translating his father's complex theological sermons for congregation members who spoke no English. By 15, he had traveled to Washington to translate for Navajo leaders negotiating land rights, even meeting President Theodore Roosevelt, who was fascinated by this white child speaking an impossible language. In December 1941, as America reeled from Pearl Harbor's devastating surprise attack, Johnston read newspaper accounts of Army units experimenting with Comanche speakers in Louisiana training exercises. The Choctaw had served as code talkers in World War I's final months, but those efforts were improvised, limited, undocumented. Johnston envisioned something revolutionary, a formal, structured military code based on Navajo that would be simultaneously unbreakable by enemies yet practical for modern warfare's split-second demands. On February 28, 1942, Johnston presented his proposal to Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego. The demonstration was remarkable in its simplicity and effectiveness. 4 Navajos from Los Angeles area transmitted tactical messages, while Marine officers timed them against standard encoding procedures. The Navajo speakers completed transmission in 20 seconds versus 30 minutes for the M209 cipher machine, a 90-fold speed advantage that could mean the difference between life and death in combat situations where seconds mattered. General Vogel, impressed despite initial skepticism, authorized a pilot program that would change warfare forever. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo recruits were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico, becoming the founding members of a program whose existence would remain classified for 26 years. These men, including Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, and John Benali, came from across the vast reservation, representing different clans and backgrounds. Some had attended government boarding schools where speaking Navajo was strictly forbidden and brutally punished with beatings, mouthwashing with lye soap, solitary confinement. Others were traditional sheep herders who rarely left their ancestral lands, men who lived according to old ways their grandparents had taught. At Camp Elliott, they worked in a locked, heavily guarded building for 8 weeks straight, creating a military code within their native language under conditions of absolute secrecy. The task was monumental in its complexity: develop precise terminology for military concepts that didn't exist in traditional Navajo, create a functional alphabet system, ensure perfect memorability since no codebooks could risk capture, and guarantee expandability for future needs. They built the code through cultural logic that made perfect sense to Navajo speakers but would remain impenetrable to outsiders. A submarine became Besh-lo, iron fish, swimming beneath the surface. A battleship was Lotso, whale, the ocean's largest creature. Fighter planes were dahiti, hummingbirds, darting through air with impossible agility. Bombers were jay-sho, buzzards, circling before descending on prey. The alphabet system required special creativity to defeat cryptanalysis. Each letter needed multiple Navajo words to prevent frequency analysis. The mathematical technique that breaks most codes by identifying common letters. The letter A received 3 alternatives: Wol-la-chi, ant; Bela-sana, apple; Tse-nik-shell, axe. The letter E, most common in English, received 4 options to further confuse pattern recognition. They developed 2 and 11 initial terms, memorizing everything with perfect accuracy. No codebooks could exist. Capture would mean instant compromise. Chester Nez recalled decades later, "We drilled endlessly, hour after hour. A single mistake could cost American lives. In our Navajo culture, words have power. They create reality. Speaking correctly wasn't just important, it was sacred." The code's first combat test came at Guadalcanal in August 1942, where 15 code talkers landed with the 1st Marine Division in America's first major offensive against Japan. The Japanese had expected the invasion, having successfully decoded other Allied communications that revealed American intentions. But suddenly, inexplicably, Marine tactical messages became completely incomprehensible static to Japanese intelligence officers monitoring communications from their headquarters in Rabaul. At Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters, intelligence officers scrambled desperately to understand these mysterious transmissions that followed Marine operations. Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada, who had been educated at Stanford before the war and spoke perfect English, reported with professional frustration. "The sounds are clearly structured like human language with consistent grammatical patterns, but it matches nothing in our extensive database. Not English, French, Dutch, Spanish, any Philippine dialect, any Chinese dialect, Indonesian, Malay, completely alien to our experience." The Japanese response was immediate and systematic, deploying their considerable cryptanalytic resources. They assigned top cryptanalysts who had broken American diplomatic codes, recorded hundreds of hours of transmissions on precious wax cylinders, applied every analytical technique in their sophisticated arsenal. They even consulted university linguists and Buddhist monks who studied ancient languages for religious purposes. Nothing worked. The sounds remained meaningless. On November the 8th, 1942, code talker Chester Nez transmitted artillery coordinates in a 14-second message that destroyed a Japanese machine gun nest, pinning down Marines. The transmission was intercepted by Japanese operators, carefully recorded, analyzed by experts, but remained meaningless noise despite intensive analysis. Within minutes, American shells fell precisely on target, eliminating the position. Colonel Haruo Konuma, intelligence officer for the Japanese 17th Army, wrote in his increasingly desperate reports to Tokyo, "The Americans have deployed a code system that defeats every cryptanalytic attempt we make. We can no longer anticipate their tactical movements. We are fighting blind while they see everything." Joe Kiyomiya, a Navajo soldier captured at Bataan in April 1942, before the Code Talker program fully deployed, became Japan's best hope for breaking the mysterious code and their greatest frustration. Though fluent in Navajo from childhood, Kiyomiya had absolutely no knowledge of the military code being simultaneously developed at Camp Elliott. When Japanese cryptographers began intercepting Navajo transmissions in late 1942, they immediately brought Kiyomiya from his POW camp to the Ofuna Interrogation Center near Tokyo. They played him carefully recorded code talker transmissions, expecting immediate translation. Kiyomiya heard Navajo words clearly, his native language spoken by fellow Dine, but in combinations that made no sense. The turtle is attacking the iron fish. The hummingbird carries eggs to the whale. When he couldn't translate these bizarre phrases, interrogators accused him of lying, of protecting enemies, of betraying his duty as a prisoner to cooperate. The torture escalated systematically over months, following Japanese military police doctrine for breaking resistant prisoners, water torture until near drowning, beatings with bamboo rods that left permanent scars, hanging by arms twisted behind back for hours until shoulders dislocated. In winter 1943, they forced him to stand naked in snow for hours until his feet literally froze to the ground, requiring medical intervention to prevent amputation. They starved him to 90 pounds, half his healthy weight, offering food only in exchange for translations he couldn't provide. Through everything, through torture that broke most men within days, Kiyomiya could only repeat the same agonizing truth. He understood individual Navajo words, but not their military meaning within this specialized code. A Japanese intelligence report from May 1943, discovered in archives after the war, documented their growing frustration. The prisoner appears to be native speaker of the mystery language but genuinely cannot comprehend transmitted messages. Assessment: either he possesses extraordinary resistance to interrogation, or enemy uses specialized military code within native language requiring specific training we cannot replicate. The second assessment was precisely correct. Even fluent Navajo speakers couldn't understand without knowing the code's military vocabulary. Success at Guadalcanal led to immediate massive program expansion. Major General Alexander van der Grift, 1st Marine Division commander, wrote with unusual emphasis, "The Navajo communicators have proven absolutely invaluable to operations. Their transmissions are faster than any mechanical encoding device and apparently absolutely secure against enemy cryptanalysis." A formal code talker school opened at Camp Pendleton, California, processing new classes every 8 weeks. By war's end, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers across all 6 Marine divisions, fighting in the Pacific. Training was unlike anything else in Marine Corps history, adapted specifically for code talkers' unique mission. Recruits practiced in soundproof booths, while instructors deliberately introduced realistic battlefield noises, explosions, gunfire, screaming through speakers. They transmitted while wearing gas masks that muffled voices. They ran obstacle courses while reciting code to build endurance under stress. Thomas H. Begay, who enlisted at just 15 by lying about his age, described the relentless training. "They pushed us beyond what seemed physically possible. American lives depended on our perfect accuracy under the worst conditions imaginable." The code evolved continuously as warfare introduced new technologies and tactics. The atomic bomb became Ayeshi, metal egg. Kamikaze pilots were Nida Ah-hai, death wind. Each edition followed logical Navajo cultural patterns, but remained completely incomprehensible to outsiders without cultural context. By mid-1943, Japanese intelligence dedicated unprecedented resources to breaking what they now recognized as a strategic threat. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 cryptanalysts exclusively to these transmissions, specialists who had successfully broken other Allied codes. Captain Yoshiro Tanaka tried innovative approaches no one had attempted: musical analysis for tonal patterns using sound recording equipment, comparison to archived Native American recordings collected by anthropologists, consultation with scholars who who had studied indigenous American languages while at US universities before the war. They developed special recording equipment to slow transmissions without distorting pitch, hoping slower playback would reveal hidden patterns. They created visual sound representations using primitive oscilloscopes, searching for visual patterns invisible to ears. They applied sophisticated statistical analysis to sound frequencies, hoping mathematics would crack what linguistics couldn't. Lieutenant Commander Masao Yamada later revealed in post-war testimony, "We identified certain patterns, probable call signs, correlation between message length and operation complexity, but without understanding actual words, these observations provided minimal tactical value." Japanese forces operating throughout the Pacific received explicit orders to capture Marine communication personnel alive at any cost. Enormous rewards, 10,000 yen, equivalent to 10 years' salary, were offered for any code talker equipment, code books, or materials. Several terrifyingly close calls occurred throughout the war, but remarkably, no code talker was ever captured with equipment intact, and none ever revealed the code under any circumstance. The battle for Iwo Jima in February–March 1945 represented the code talkers' greatest contribution to American victory. Major Howard Connor coordinated the entire initial assault exclusively through Navajo Code, directing the most complex amphibious operation in Marine Corps history. 6 code talkers working in rotating teams maintained absolutely continuous communication throughout the invasion's critical first 48 hours, the period when Japanese counterattacks could have driven Americans back into the sea. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had prepared Iwo Jima for 2 years, constructing an underground fortress with 11 miles of tunnels, connecting hundreds of reinforced positions. His sophisticated defensive plan relied heavily on intercepting American communications to trigger precisely timed counterattacks that would maximize casualties. This plan failed completely because Kuribayashi's intelligence officers couldn't understand a single tactical transmission. Over those crucial 48 hours, the 6 code talkers sent and received over 800 messages without a single error, an achievement unmatched in communications history. They coordinated 30,000 Marines landing under fire, naval gunfire from 100 warships, close air support from hundreds of aircraft, enemy position reports, medical evacuations, supply requests, and tactical orders, all while under constant artillery bombardment. Major Connor later testified before Congress, were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. During the first 48 hours, I had 6 Navajo radio nets operating around the clock. They sent and received over 800 messages without an error. The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code. Artillery requests that would have taken 30 minutes through conventional encoding were completed in 20 seconds through Navajo. The difference between destroying enemy positions and losing American positions to Japanese fire. On August 14, 1945, code talker Teddy Draper Sr. transmitted the war's most significant message in Navajo, "Ni hema ade gini adi nilt," Japanese surrender accepted. The message went through Navajo channels before conventional communications, a fitting end to the Code Talkers' War. After Japan's surrender, American interrogators discovered the full extent of Japanese cryptanalytic efforts and their complete failure. Lieutenant General Seizo Arisue, Japan's chief of intelligence, admitted with professional humiliation, "We never broke the Marine Code despite years of dedicated effort. We broke Army codes, Air Force codes, diplomatic traffic, but the Marine Tactical Code remained completely secure throughout the war." Captain Yasuji Kawamoto was brutally specific about the failure's extent. "We recorded thousands of transmissions. Our absolute best linguists studied them intensively for 3 years. We tried every analytical technique known to cryptography. Nothing worked. It was our greatest cryptanalytic failure and cost us dearly in tactical intelligence." Colonel Masao Yamada admitted the strategic consequences. "Our inability to read Marine communications cost thousands of Japanese lives. Every Marine operation after 1942 was a complete mystery until it began. We couldn't prepare, couldn't anticipate, couldn't counter. The war's end didn't end the Code Talkers' burden of secrecy. The program remained classified until 1968 for potential Cold War use against Soviet communications. Code Talkers returned home unable to discuss their service with anyone, not families, not friends, not fellow veterans. They returned to states that still denied them voting rights: New Mexico and Arizona until 1948, Utah until 1957. Hotels and restaurants refused them service under segregation laws. They were heroes who couldn't reveal their heroism, warriors who couldn't share their war. Many found healing through traditional Navajo ceremonies. The Enemy Way ceremony purified warriors from warfare's spiritual contamination. As Dan Aki explained, "We had used our sacred language to direct death. We needed ceremonies to restore harmony. They reminded us our language was sacred, meant for beauty and healing, not just war. The most significant recognition came July 26, 2001, when President George W. Bush presented congressional gold medals to the original 29 Code Talkers in the Capitol Rotunda. Only 5 originals survived to attend. Bush declared, "Today, we honor 29 Native Americans who gave their country a service only they could give." Chester Nez, last surviving original Code Talker who died in 2014, responded, "We were ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war." Today, as the last Code Talkers pass into history, only 2 now survive from approximately 400 who served. Their legacy endures in profound ways. The Navajo language that boarding schools tried to eliminate became the key to Pacific victory. The diversity Japan's ideology couldn't accommodate became America's unbreakable strength. The Code Talkers proved America's greatest encryption is diversity itself, unbreakable because it emerges from limitless human experience and cultural wisdom that no enemy can comprehend or replicate. Lieutenant General Arisue's admission that Japan never cracked the code used by Marines acknowledges a truth transcending military defeat. They faced an opponent whose strength came from sources their ideology couldn't accommodate: linguistic diversity, cultural preservation, indigenous knowledge serving modern purposes. The Unbroken Code remains unbroken, living in every native child speaking their ancestral language with pride, in every recognition that minority contributions strengthen rather than weaken, in every understanding that differences make us stronger together. The Navajo Code Talkers sent messages Japan never decoded, but their greatest message was universal and eternal. Our differences are not weaknesses to overcome, but strengths to celebrate, preserve, and deploy for freedom itself.